Margaret Chen, called Maggie by everyone who knew her, was 26 years old when she inherited a cave that nobody wanted. It was April 18th, 1881, in Silver Ridge, New Mexico Territory, and her husband Thomas had just died in a mine collapse that killed 3 men and left 5 widows struggling to survive in a town that had no use for women without men. The collapse had happened April 10th at the Silver Star mine. A timber support gave way in a shaft 200 feet underground. Thomas Chen, Michael O'Brien, and James Dakota were working that section. The cave-in was instantaneous. By the time rescue crews reached them 6 hours later, all 3 were dead, crushed by tons of rock in a mine that made other men wealthy while paying workers $3 daily. Thomas had been 29. They'd been married 4 years. Had come to New Mexico Territory from California in 1877, chasing silver boom promises that never materialized for Chinese immigrants. Thomas worked harder than most men, earned the same $3 daily as everyone else, saved religiously for the proper house they'd build someday, the house that died with him in 200 feet of rock and darkness. The funeral was April 12th, 5 coffins, 5 widows dressed in black. A mining company representative who expressed sympathy but offered no compensation because the timber failure was act of God, not company negligence. The company gave each widow $10 as gesture of goodwill, enough to bury a husband and starve slowly afterward. Maggie stood at Thomas's grave, understanding her situation with cold clarity. She was 26 years old. Chinese-American in a predominantly white territory, with no family nearby, no marketable skills beyond basic literacy and arithmetic, and $3 remaining after funeral expenses. The cave Thomas had claimed was hers by default because nobody else wanted it. Silver Ridge offered limited options for widows. Domestic service paid room and board plus $2 monthly, essentially indentured servitude with no path to independence. Laundry work paid 50 cents per day, but required capital for equipment and space. Seamstress work required expensive sewing machines. Cooking or cleaning in saloons or boarding houses paid slightly better, but came with expectations that decent women avoided discussing publicly. Thomas had claimed the cave dwelling 2 years earlier when they couldn't afford proper housing in the mining town where silver boom inflation had driven rents to $5 monthly, more than Thomas earned in a week. The cave was natural limestone formation carved by water over millennia, located a mile outside Silver Ridge in a rocky hillside. Locals called it Chen's Hole, with derision. Living in a cave meant failure in a town obsessed with silver wealth and visible status. The cave was actually remarkable. Nature had created a chamber approximately 20 feet wide, 30 feet deep, and 12 feet high at the center. The entrance faced southeast, providing light and sun exposure. The interior stayed at constant 52 degrees year-round, regardless of outside temperature, the natural thermal property of deep earth and limestone insulation. Thomas and Maggie had lived there for 2 years. It was dark, damp in places, and socially embarrassing, but it cost nothing. Thomas had built a wooden front wall, closing off the entrance with a door and 2 windows. They'd lived with minimal comfort, saving money for eventual proper housing that Thomas's death made impossible. Now Maggie was alone with Thomas's cave and $3 to her name. She could try to find work in town, limited options for a Chinese-American widow in a territory where most work was mining, ranching, or domestic service. She could return to California, where her family lived, but had no resources to help her, or she could make the cave into something functional and survive on her own terms. Maggie's father had been a mining engineer in California before his death when she was 18. He taught her about thermal dynamics, air circulation, and ventilation systems used in deep mines. He'd explained how temperature stays constant below certain depths, how air movement can be controlled and directed, how chimneys create draft through pressure differences. Looking at the cave with her father's knowledge, Maggie saw something nobody else recognized. The cave was thermally stable at 52 degrees. That was a huge advantage. In summer, when outside temperature reached 90 degrees, the cave was 38 degrees cooler naturally. In winter, when outside dropped to 10 degrees, the cave was 42 degrees warmer naturally. The baseline 52 degrees meant minimal energy needed to reach comfortable temperature year-round, but the cave needed proper heating system. Thomas had used a small stove near the entrance with a stovepipe exiting horizontally through a hole in the wooden front wall. This worked poorly. Smoke accumulated. Heat escaped too quickly. The system fought the cave's natural air circulation instead of working with it. Maggie conceived a different system, a vertical chimney running from deep inside the cave straight up through the limestone ceiling to exit above ground. This would create natural draft. Warm air rising through the chimney would pull fresh air in through the entrance, creating circulation. The cave's thermal mass would absorb heat from the fire and radiate it slowly. The vertical draft would eliminate smoke accumulation. She took her plan to Harold Morrison, the town's mason and builder. He looked at her drawings and laughed. Not politely, actually laughed. "Mrs. Chen, you want to drill a chimney through solid limestone, up through 20 feet of rock? That's impossible. Even if it were possible, it would cost hundreds of dollars. You're proposing to improve a cave. Just move to town like a civilized person. The cave has better thermal properties than any wooden building in Silver Ridge. It maintains constant temperature naturally. A proper chimney would make it superior to conventional housing." "It's a cave, a hole in the ground. No amount of chimney will make it respectable. You're a widow. You should accept reality and find appropriate work." She tried 2 other builders. Both refused. Said the same things. Impossible. Too expensive. Inappropriate for a woman alone. Accept conventional housing and conventional work. Maggie decided to do it herself. She had $3, basic tools Thomas had left, and knowledge from her father about drilling and ventilation. She bought a hammer and cold chisel for $2.50, leaving 50 cents for food. Drilling through limestone was brutal work, but possible. Limestone was softer than granite or basalt. You could drill it with patience and proper technique. She'd watched miners drill rock, had asked her father questions, understood the principles. She marked her chimney location deep inside the cave, centered in the back third where the ceiling was thickest. The chimney needed to be narrow, 10 inches in diameter, would provide adequate draft without excessive drilling. She needed to penetrate approximately 20 feet of limestone to reach the surface above. She began drilling in May, starting the work that would define the next 5 months of her life and prove to everyone that determination could accomplish what money and male labor supposedly could not. The technique was simple, but brutal. Position the cold chisel against the limestone ceiling, angled slightly upward to ensure vertical exit above ground. Strike it hard with the hammer, a full-force overhead swing that sent shockwaves through her arms and shoulders. Rotate the chisel slightly, maybe 30 degrees. Strike again, rotate, strike. Each impact removed tiny chips of limestone, creating slow progress measured in fractions of an inch. The physical toll was immediate and cumulative. Her hands blistered within the first day. The wooden hammer handle rubbed skin raw where she gripped it. By day 3, the blisters had broken and bled, making every hammer swing painful. By the end of the first week, thick calluses were forming over the damaged tissue, creating protective layers that allowed continued work despite constant pain. Her arms and shoulders screamed continuously. The overhead striking motion used muscles not designed for sustained repetition. Each swing required full body strength, legs, core, shoulders, arms, all working together to drive the hammer down onto the chisel with enough force to chip limestone. After the first week, her shoulders burned with constant inflammation. Her biceps and triceps ached even when resting. Her back muscles, stressed from the overhead angle, cramped painfully. Her neck suffered worst of all. She had to look up constantly to see the drilling point, aim the chisel, verify progress. Hours of looking up, head tilted back, neck muscles strained, created permanent stiffness. By the second week, she could barely turn her head without sharp pain. By the third week, the stiffness became constant condition she learned to work through. The limestone dust was insidious. Each hammer strike sent tiny particles falling directly into her upturned face. The dust got in her eyes, causing constant irritation and partial vision impairment, got in her nose and throat, making breathing difficult and causing continuous coughing, got in her hair, on her skin, in her clothes, coating everything in fine grey powder that was impossible to remove completely. Progress was measured in painful increments. She could drill approximately 3 inches per day, working from sunrise to sunset with brief breaks, when her arms literally could not lift the hammer anymore. 3 inches out of 240 inches total. Each day's work was barely visible progress that required absolute faith the accumulated effort would eventually break through. The drilling pattern became relentless routine. Strike for 30 minutes until arms screamed. Rest for 10 minutes, allowing burning muscles to recover slightly. Strike for another 30 minutes. Rest. The hole deepened inch by agonizing inch. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. Each foot deeper made the work harder because debris had to be cleared from increasing depth before drilling could continue. She fashioned a clearing tool from a thin branch. A long stick she'd push up into the hole to force broken limestone out. The deeper the hole, the more frequently she had to clear it. By the time she'd reached 10 feet depth, she was spending as much time clearing debris as drilling. Push the stick up, force limestone chunks down and out, sweep them away, resume drilling. By day 20, she'd drilled 3 feet deep. Her body had changed visibly. She'd lost significant weight from sustained physical labor and minimal food, couldn't afford adequate nutrition on 50 cents remaining after tool purchase. Her arms and shoulders had become harder, more defined from constant overhead hammering. Her hands were masses of calluses and half-healed blisters. Her face was permanently dust-covered, eyes red from constant irritation, throat raw from breathing limestone particles. Sarah Mitchell, wife of the mine superintendent, organized a concerned visit. 5 women riding to the cave to pressure Maggie into accepting domestic work. "Margaret, dear, you're destroying yourself attempting this foolish project. Drilling rock is men's work. You're a widow. You need to accept your situation. The Morrison family needs a housekeeper. Room and board plus $2 monthly. That's appropriate work. I'm making my cave into proper housing with efficient heating. The chimney will create draft and eliminate smoke. This is engineering, not foolishness." It's a cave. You're living like an animal. Drilling holes in the ceiling won't change that. Accept civilized employment. Maggie kept drilling. By July, she'd penetrated 10 feet into the limestone. Halfway through, the work became more dangerous as the hole deepened. Debris falling from 10 feet up could injure her. She had to clear the hole constantly, using a long stick to push broken limestone out. By September, she'd drilled 16 feet, nearly through. She could feel the limestone getting thinner, could sense she was approaching breakthrough. Her hands were masses of calluses. Her arms and shoulders had adapted to the sustained overhead hammering. She'd become frighteningly thin from 3 months of minimal food and maximum labor. In late September, she broke through. The cold chisel suddenly went deeper than expected, punching through the final layer of limestone. Fresh air and sunlight poured down the hole. She'd successfully drilled a 10-inch diameter chimney through 20 feet of solid limestone by hand. Alone, with $2.50 in tools. Now came the installation. She built a small firebox from stones at the base of the chimney deep inside the cave. Built a stone hood to direct smoke into the chimney shaft. The vertical 20-foot draft would create powerful pull, drawing smoke up efficiently. She tested it in early October, lit a small fire in the firebox. Smoke rose immediately and perfectly up the chimney shaft. No accumulation, no backdraft. The vertical draft pulled so strongly she could feel air movement at the cave entrance, as fresh air flowed in to replace the rising warm air. The thermal effect was immediate. The fire heated the stone firebox and surrounding limestone. The limestone absorbed the heat and radiated it slowly into the cave. The constant 52-degree baseline meant even a small fire raised temperature to 65 degrees. The radiant heat from the limestone walls maintained comfortable temperature for hours after the fire died. The circulation system worked exactly as thermal dynamics predicted. Warm air rose up the chimney. Cool air flowed in through the entrance. The air circulated through the cave, distributing heat evenly. The limestone walls acted as thermal mass, absorbing heat during fire burning and releasing it slowly afterward. She'd created a thermally efficient heating system using natural cave properties and proper chimney design. The cave everyone mocked was becoming the most efficiently heated dwelling in Silver Ridge. November brought cold weather. Temperature dropped to 20 degrees overnight. Maggie burned one small fire in evening, maybe 3 logs. The cave reached 68 degrees. When the fire died, the temperature dropped slowly over 8 hours to 60 degrees, staying there until morning. She burned perhaps 1 cord of wood per month. Her neighbors in wooden houses were burning 4 cords monthly, constantly feeding fires to maintain 55 degrees. People noticed her minimal smoke output, drew wrong conclusions. The widow was cold, was suffering in her cave, was too proud to admit her chimney drilling had failed. Then December came with cold that proved everything and transformed how Silver Ridge understood heating and thermal efficiency. The cold snap arrived December 15th with minimal warning that most people dismissed. Morning started at 20 degrees, cold for New Mexico, but manageable. By noon, temperature had dropped to 10 degrees. By evening, -5 degrees. This wasn't temporary cold front. This was sustained Arctic air mass settling over the territory and staying there. December 16th morning, -10 degrees. By evening, -15 degrees. December 17th, -18 degrees sustained. The cold persisted day after day, an unrelenting Arctic assault that overwhelmed heating systems designed for occasional cold snaps, not sustained extreme temperatures. By day 3, Silver Ridge was in crisis. Families were burning through winter wood supplies at unsustainable rates. The general store had sold out of firewood completely, no supply available at any price. People were burning furniture, fence posts, anything combustible to maintain barely adequate indoor temperatures. Children were showing signs of cold exposure despite being indoors continuously. The elderly were struggling with dangerous hypothermia risk. Conventional wooden houses couldn't maintain heat in -15-degree weather. The thin walls provided minimal insulation. Heat escaped constantly through gaps, windows, poorly insulated ceilings. Families were burning wood continuously, keeping fires fed every hour, day and night, and still watching interior temperatures drop to dangerous levels. The Morrison family's house couldn't maintain 50 degrees despite burning wood continuously for 72 hours. They'd consumed 2 cords in 3 days, more than they typically burned in a month. Their children were cold constantly despite wearing every piece of clothing they owned indoors. Harold Morrison was burning the furniture his father had built, feeding chairs and tables into the stove piece by piece to keep his family above 45 degrees. The Mitchell family had depleted their woodpile completely by day 4. Sarah Mitchell was burning books, the family Bible, her children's school books, novels she'd brought from Boston, feeding pages into the stove to buy a few more minutes of warmth. Their house was 48 degrees inside, with -18 degrees outside. The mathematics didn't work. They couldn't produce heat fast enough to offset heat loss through inadequate insulation. The Henderson cabin was failing catastrophically. -15-degree weather revealed every gap in construction. Cold air flowed in through cracks they'd never noticed. Heat escaped through the ceiling, despite burning maximum fire. By day 5, their interior temperature had dropped to 43 degrees. Their youngest child, age 3, was showing early hypothermia symptoms: lethargy, confusion, skin turning grayish-blue. Dr. Patterson visited and gave frank assessment. If this cold continues 2 more days, this child will die in her own home. Maggie's cave stayed comfortable throughout the crisis, demonstrating thermal principles that conventional construction completely ignored. The cave's baseline temperature was 52 degrees, regardless of outside conditions. When outside temperature hit -18 degrees, the cave interior, with no fire burning at all, maintained 52 degrees. That was a 70-degree advantage over outside temperature, provided entirely by earth insulation and limestone thermal mass. Maggie wasn't starting from -18 and trying to heat to 65. She was starting from 52 and only needed to add 13 degrees of heating. One small fire in evening, perhaps 3 or 4 logs burned over 2 hours, raised the cave temperature to 68 degrees. The limestone firebox absorbed heat from the flames. The surrounding limestone walls absorbed radiant heat. When the fire died after 2 hours, the temperature didn't plummet. The limestone thermal mass released stored heat slowly over the next 12 hours. By morning, cave temperature had dropped only to 60 degrees. Still comfortable, still above the baseline 52 degrees that would maintain even if she did nothing. She was burning maybe 4 logs daily during the worst cold. Her neighbors were burning 40 logs daily and still failing to maintain adequate temperature. The cave everyone had mocked was outperforming conventional construction by a factor of 10 in heating efficiency. People noticed within days. Noticed that Chen's cave had minimal smoke output compared to the desperate continuous smoke from every wooden structure. Drew wrong conclusions initially, assumed the widow was freezing, was too poor to buy wood, was suffering in her hole. The mockery intensified. The crazy widow who drilled a chimney through rock was now proving caves couldn't be heated adequately. Then Sarah Mitchell came on day 4, desperate and honest. She arrived at the cave entrance mid-morning, knocked, entered when Maggie invited her in, and stopped immediately, shocked by what she felt. The cave was warm, actually warm, not the barely adequate 48 degrees of her own house despite continuous burning, not the desperate cold that required heavy layers indoors. Genuinely comfortable warmth that made Sarah's frost-damaged skin tingle as circulation returned. "Your cave is warm," Sarah said, voice filled with disbelief and desperation. "How? We've burned 2 cords in 4 days and our house won't stay above 48 degrees. You're burning almost nothing and it's comfortable here. Please teach us. The Henderson child is dying from cold inside her own home. If you know something we don't, we need your help." Maggie showed her everything. Took her to the stone firebox at the base of the vertical chimney. Explained how the 20-foot vertical shaft created powerful draft that pulled smoke up efficiently while drawing fresh air in through the entrance. Showed her the limestone walls. Explained how thermal mass stores heat and releases it slowly over hours. Explained the baseline 52-degree temperature that the cave maintained naturally. "The cave starts at 52 degrees, Maggie explained, touching the limestone wall. "This rock is 4 feet into the hillside. The temperature 4 feet underground stays constant year-round, about 52 degrees in New Mexico. That's my baseline. When I light a fire, I'm only heating from 52 to 65 degrees. 13 degrees of temperature rise. You're trying to heat from -15 outside to 65 inside. 80 degrees of temperature rise. You need 6 times more heat than I do, just because of different baseline. But our houses have fireplaces and stoves. We're burning constantly. Why doesn't it work?" Your houses have thin wooden walls. Heat escapes constantly through the wood, through gaps, through windows, through the roof. You're trying to heat a structure that bleeds heat continuously. My cave is surrounded by tons of limestone. Heat doesn't escape. The limestone absorbs it and holds it. And the vertical chimney creates circulation without letting heat escape with the smoke. And by day 5, word had spread. The cave everyone mocked was the warmest dwelling in Silver Ridge. The chimney everyone called impossible was functioning better than any conventional heating system. Families began visiting, desperate to understand how the widow living in a hole stayed comfortable while they froze in expensive houses. Harold Morrison came on day 6, humble and ashamed, stood in the cave feeling the radiant warmth from limestone walls. Watched the perfect draft pulling smoke up the vertical chimney he'd said was impossible to drill. Understood completely that everything he'd told Maggie was wrong. I refused to help you because I thought drilling through 20 feet of limestone was impossible, he said quietly. Because I thought improving a cave was foolish waste. Because I assumed conventional construction was superior to natural formations. I was wrong about all of it. This cave with your chimney is warmer than my house with my professional fireplace. You've taught me that understanding thermal properties matters more than following conventional methods. The cold snap lasted 8 days total. Through all of it, Maggie's cave remained comfortable with minimal fuel, while expensive wooden houses failed. By day 8, when temperatures finally moderated back to 20 degrees and the crisis passed, 17 families had visited the cave to learn from the system everyone had mocked. The cold snap ended December 23rd. But the transformation in Silver Ridge was permanent. The widow living in Chen's hole became the heating engineer everyone consulted. By January, 6 families had asked Maggie to help design improved heating systems. She taught them thermal mass principles, circulation concepts, how to work with natural properties instead of fighting them. The Morrison family rebuilt their fireplace using limestone thermal mass design Maggie taught them. The Mitchell family added a second chimney to improve circulation. 3 families with limestone near their properties started building thermal mass heating systems. Maggie began earning money as a consultant. Families paid her $2 to analyze their heating systems and suggest improvements, $5 to help design and supervise renovations. Within 3 months, she'd earned $40, more than she could have made in a year as a domestic servant. She lived in her cave for 12 years, never married again, became known throughout New Mexico territory as an expert in thermal mass heating and natural temperature control. Mining companies consulted her on ventilation systems. Builders asked her advice on fireplace design. She was the woman who turned a cave into the territory's most efficient dwelling. She died in 1923 at age 68. Her obituary mentioned her engineering work, but focused primarily on the cave, the limestone chamber with the hand-drilled chimney that proved superior to conventional construction, the widow who'd understood thermal dynamics better than professional builders. The cave still exists, preserved by the New Mexico Historical Society. Modern thermal analysis confirms what Maggie proved in 1881. Limestone thermal mass provides exceptional heat storage. Vertical chimneys create superior draft and circulation. Constant baseline temperature reduces heating requirements dramatically. The historical marker reads, Margaret Chen, 1855 to 1923. Mining engineer's daughter, who hand-drilled 20-foot chimney through limestone and created thermal mass heating system in natural cave dwelling, demonstrated that understanding thermal dynamics matters more than conventional construction methods. But the real story is about a widow everyone dismissed who drilled through 20 feet of rock by hand, who turned a cave into the most efficient dwelling in the territory, who taught a community that mocked her that natural properties properly used create superior results because sometimes the woman drilling a hole through stone knows more about heating than men who build with conventional methods. The cave everyone called a failure was actually the only structure that truly worked when cold tested everything.